fellow Wasteland survivors and fellow Mudbeards, and today I wanted to go ahead and bring another video breaking down the characters of Abby's crew. Now I'll go ahead and break down the descriptions presented by the show, and then the descriptions of the character that I would personally give to describe the basis of these characters, and then towards the end of the video I'll go into more spoiler territory for where these characters will actually end up. With that being said, let's go ahead and get into it. We'll go ahead and start with Abby. Abby is a very pivotal character to Season 2 and the story as a whole. Abby is played by Caitlin Dever. Interestingly enough, Season 2 actually opens from her perspective. She is very much the leader of the crew and instigator for their mission that leads them all the way to Jackson. And we see by the ending of the beginning of Season 1 that her and her crew have finally made their way there. Just like in the game, both versions of Abby's crew were the people who bore witness to the aftermath of Joel's massacre back in the Firefly base. During this time, a lot of the surviving Fireflies ended up needing to find a different place to live. One of these places happened to be the Washington Liberation Front over in Seattle.
Ed has a brother who runs an outfit in Seattle, a guy named Isaac. Supposedly he'd take us all in.
But let's go ahead and move on to the next character in Abby's group, and that would be Manny. Manny within the show will be played by Danny Ramirez. Manny is described in the show as a loyal soldier whose sunny outlook bellies the pain of old wounds and a fear that he will fail his friends when they need him the most. Interestingly enough, this description does still fit Manny as a character in the games, but it's a little bit different. See, Manny in the games was very much a loyal friend and somebody who did thoroughly watch out for all the people within the group. But when we got a look at some of his home life amongst the WLF, we could also find that he was very popular amongst his community, even earning the title of a bit of a womanizer. That being said, within the games, when you're playing as Abby, you do play a lot of those sections with Manny as your ally. His commentary and dialogue between Abby as a character really does solidify their bond and show you a little bit more depth to Manny's character. It shows how from one side of the story you see a soldier who is very loyal to his friends and willing to do anything for them, but from another perspective you could easily see him as just one of the many soldiers that are needed to be taken out because he's a threat to your community or someone you love. One of the many other reasons why you needed two different perspectives of this conflict brewing between Abby and Ellie. Now let's move on to Mel. Mel is an interesting character because she is also a very big turning point within the story in the games, and I'm interested to see how they tackle her character within the show. Mel is played by Ariella Barra. The HBO description of her character goes as a young doctor whose commitment to saving lives is challenged by the realities of war and tribalism. Within the games, Mel's character was very interesting because when you're playing as Abby, you can see there's a bit of tension building between both you, Mel, and Owen. And this tension is very palpable from the very opening of the game and Abby and Owen's very first conversation. See, within the games, it's shown to us that Abby already has a pretty strong bond with Manny and Owen before the events of Joel's massacre. And we see throughout the games that while Abby is training with the WLF, she forms a stronger bond with Owen, eventually blossoming into a full-on relationship. But Abby's devotion and dedication to finding Joel does sort of split them apart at some point. This inevitably leads to Owen and Mel forming a relationship together. And within the games, Owen and Mel's relationship results in her own pregnancy being revealed right before the moment that Abby's crew finds their way to Jackson. This pregnancy does carry very big narrative impacts throughout the story. And throughout the games, it's interesting because you get to see that despite this pregnancy, Mel as a character is still very devoted to helping and providing aid to those who might need it. She very much swallows up a lot of the awkward tension between Abby and some of the ignorance she displays in their relationship and consideration, and sticks to just focusing on how she can help her crew. Her reception in the games was back and forth, some people seeing where she was coming from and some people just not liking her because she was against the main cast. But I feel within the games a lot of her reactions were very reasonable and very just. Let's go ahead and move on to the character of Nora, played by Tati Gabrielle. She's described in HBO as a military medic struggling to come to terms with the sins of her past. Now, for those who did play the games, we didn't really get too much of Nora before her big moment within the story, outside of some bonding moments with Abby. But within those bonding moments, we can see that Nora is a pretty decent person. In the games, she actually does go and buy Abby some time so she can help out the enemies of the WLF in getting some aid. And interestingly enough, when the show opens up, she's one of the first people to provide a confrontational perspective to Abby's mission. Her reluctance at Abby's immediate aggression and determination to go and find Joel is going to play out later within the story. And let's go ahead and cover one of the last characters we've seen of Abby's crew, and that is Owen, played by Spencer Lord. Described in HBO as a gentle soul trapped in a warrior's body, condemned to fight an enemy he refuses to hate. Owen's character is very interesting because from a moral standpoint, he is one of the best characters out there. He's kind of caught up in a lot of situations, and his loyalty to those he loves and reluctance to really stand up and grow a backbone for some of these situations really does lead him to his character's outcome. See, Owen's one of those characters who, while he is genuinely a good guy, he kind of just wants everybody to be happy. This leads him to ignoring some of the growing conflict between characters like Mel and Abby. However, that doesn't negate the positive impact he did have on some of her characters. Abby's growth as an individual was mostly because of Owen. Owen is far from innocent, but the games prove that his actions do carry weight on his mental, and he carries it with them through most of the story. His moral compass and how it conflicts with the aspects of war kind of derail a lot of the WLF plans within the game. And with those loose descriptions out of the way and game connections, let's go ahead and break down some of the outcomes for these characters. We'll start out by pointing out the obvious. Some of the characters are missing from the game. Now, these characters, while somewhat interesting and having their own background stories you can figure out throughout the game, narratively weren't too important, and I could see why they would have cut them out. That being said, I'm really happy they kept Manny around because he was one of my favorites of Abby's crew. Speaking of which, let's go ahead and start with Manny. Manny's outcome within the games was brutal, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. See, the second game did something brilliant. It introduced a lot of likable and interesting characters and made us attached to them to the point that when they were killed off in very realistic and very natural ways, to us it came off as a huge shock and huge twist. See, Manny's outcome within the games is he continues to support Abby, and just like with most of her crew, his support of Abby does lead to his own downfall. At one point, him and Abby going head to head against a sniper who's too good at what they do, and during a sequence where they're trying to find an alternate route to get to him, Manny does end up getting shot. The grounded, realistic nature of how quickly one of your friends can get bodied right in front of you does kind of make you feel for Abby in a way. This war at losing of friends is what she's constantly been seeing this entire time that Ellie's been hanging out in Jackson. Either way, Manny's a character who was a standout for me in the games, and I'm very interested to see how they handle it inside of the show. Let's go ahead and move on to Mel. Mel was a character who's very easily right away to dislike within the games, but if you really do have an open mind and look at things from her perspective, you can see that she's kind of screwed over. Basically encouraged to jump along this mission with Abby and Owen because of her love for Owen and her involvement with Abby's crew in the first place. But upon the return after the events of Jackson, you can see that Mel is not having a great time. And with her being pregnant with Owen's child, Owen obviously still having feelings for Abby, and them being constantly surrounded by war, Mel's character is constantly at the boiling point of stress. And Abby's anger leads her to be pretty neglectful of other people's feelings and perspectives, and at some point Mel finally throws that back in her face. So we'll see if this same tension between her and Abby does persist within the show, but either way, maybe the show will lean more into her medical involvement within the series. Let's move on to Owen. Owen is a character whose loyalty to whatever side of the coin will determine his actions, even if he ends up later regretting those actions. And it's very obvious that every action he takes throughout the game in support of Abby just further and further digs his own grave. His refusal to really solidify where his feelings lie and who he's willing to devote himself to between Abby and Mel does kind of lead to the brewing conflict between them and separation during certain points. The domino effect of a lot of his indecisions, or the internal conflict he has after making said decisions, does kind of define his character. In a world as cruel as this, being back and forth quite often can lead to you or those you care about getting bodied. But let's go ahead and talk about the character of Nora. Nora was a very intriguing character in the game because every moment we got of her with Abby, she seemed like a stand-up, reasonable person. However, from Ellie's perspective, every instance we got of Nora, she was hostile and angry. During the sequence in the game where Abby's crew does attempt to take out Joel, Nora's the one to beat Tommy down. And she didn't do it reluctantly, she did it with aggression. This segues us into her confrontation with Ellie. There seems to be a moment where maybe she tries to reason with her and get her to understand that what Joel did wasn't actually a good thing to do, but we also see within a split second that she doubles down. Whether that had been a tactical move to distract Ellie or make her filled with rage so that she wouldn't be able to think as clearly, or if she actually did feel like she was going to die in that moment and didn't want to give Ellie the satisfaction of begging. The argument is up for debate, but given the HBO description of the character, I think they're heading in a different direction. See, within the games, Nora ends up getting cornered and beaten down by Ellie, and I would argue that within this moment, we still don't fully know if she does actually regret the actions she took against Joel. And while it would be reasonable that she wouldn't, considering the actions Joel took against her, HBO's description of her character in The Last of Us does make me think that perhaps her actions within Joel's outcome will carry weight throughout the entire series. To read it again, HBO describes her character as a military medic struggling to come to terms with the sins of her past. The sins of her past weren't necessarily displayed to us in the opening of the series when they were talking about going and chasing Joel. So it's probably safe to presume that some of the actions they take in finding Joel within the show will sit with her in a very negative way. I think Abby and the Salt Lake crew's arrival within Jackson will inevitably lead to Jackson being overrun with the infected. Now, this is partly alluded to within the trailers, but if the damage is more significant than they could have imagined, I could see why a lot more regret would be held within the Salt Lake crew on their return back to the WLF. This also leads me to my next point. We already know that Season 2 has split the story of the game into 2 different parts. And with how Episode 1 was structured and how we're only getting 7 episodes throughout the entire season, I have a theory. And this feeling is basically that the season will end with Ellie confronting Nora just like in the games, and that whole entire brutal sequence being the final moment. Or at least the final conflict of the episode. The episode itself could still end at any point, but that being said, I do think that Nora's death is going to be in the final episode of the season. Which I think is fitting, considering in the games it was a pretty big impactful moment, and in the series she's being played by Tati Gabrielle, who is an outstanding actor and was in both The 100 and the show You, as well as many other projects. That being said, that was my breakdown of the Salt Lake crew. Abby's team is definitely on a mission within the beginning of the story, just like in the games, but I'm curious what kind of diversions they'll make from the story. What about you guys? Are you looking forward to Abby's crew and some of their character dynamics within the show? Are you looking forward to their golfing trip over to Jackson? Either way, I'm excited to see some of these actors bring it in because they're going to need some strong performances for some of the things that go down. Thanks for watching, appreciate the feedback, and remember, following Abby is like following a white horse of death.